the difference between the BC Greens and Green parties generally and other political parties is this core set of values. And one of the most interesting things for me is that when I've met Greens from around the world, I've met Greens from Australia and New Zealand, from Germany, from England, and across Canada. We all are very similar people. We're all sort of oriented to these fundamental values, to the idea that politics should be something that is improving people's lives, improving the world, definitely improving our environmental world, but that we operate differently from other parties because the Greens, are not oriented to how do we get power and how do we hold power. It's really how do we make democracy, how do we make government work better? And when you're rooted, I find, in these fundamental values, these ideas, these principles, it makes it really clear how to approach the role of being a Green. So participatory democracy, I'm going to give concrete examples. Yes, it means that the members of the party are participating in coming up with our policies and guiding us. But as an elected MLA, for me, participatory democracy meant that when there was a significant issue in my riding, in my constituency, I invited the community in. We worked together as a community to solve it.
Hello, I am John Brink and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And all those people watching us from around the world, well, we know where Canada is and we know where British Columbia is. We know that big city in British Columbia called Vancouver, but where is Prince George? Well, we are about 500 miles north of Vancouver, or for our friends in Europe, 800 kilometers, and it is in the center of the province. North, south, east, west, and we have, within 50 miles of Prince George, we have about 100 lakes, we have lots of forest, we have lots of animals, black bears, grizzlies, caribou, deer, you name it, we have here, and we live in harmony with nature. It is paradise. Now today, a very, very special guest. Her name is Sonia Furstenau, and what is happening now in British Columbia, we have elections around the corner. In fact, October the 19th. In this podcast in particular, we will be podcasting all the leaders of the important parties in British Columbia. The BC United Party is one of them, and we interviewed Kevin Falcon, and what was his name again?
Kevin Falcon.
Yeah, we've interviewed him on a podcast, as well as we have invited another person on the podcast, John Rustad, that is a member of the new Conservative Party in British Columbia. Unfortunately, he has not been able to come yet, but he indicated he wants to be on my podcast. And then we have the BC NDP Party, the National Democratic Party, the Premier Ibby, who unfortunately so far has not indicated that he will be on my podcast. And then today we have Sonia Furstenau, who is the leader of the BC Green Party, or the BC Greens as they call them, in the province. And she is unique in the way that, what is unique about the Greens actually, it's quite common in Europe actually, but the Greens here in North America started in 1983, and the first time that a Green Party was developed was in British Columbia. Mm-hmm. And the first time that they elected a person to the Greens, and that was in 1983. Can you imagine that, 40 years ago? And the first time that they elected a member of the Green Party on a government, it was in 2013, so which is 30 years ago, and it was Sonia that became the first time a member of the Green Party. Was that correct, Sonia?
Right. The first Green MLA, member of the legislature to
Right.
be elected, was Andrew Weaver. The first federal Green was Elizabeth May. But
And
I was, in 2017, Adam Olson and I were the second and third Greens ever to be elected in BC, and we were the first BC Green caucus, because you need more than one person to be a caucus.
right. And right now you have two members,
That's right.
yourself
And
and
Adam Olson.
now the question that a lot of people have about the Greens,
Yeah.
who are they? What do they stand for? And so the way I understand it, the principles of the Greens are participatory democracy, sustainability, social justice, respect for diversity, ecology, wisdom, and nonviolence.
Mm-hmm.
So explain those principles, in particular, democrat or the principle of participatory democracy. Is
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the principle there is individuals, in particular, are active in the party. Explain it to us what it really means.
Yeah, so I'll pull back a little bit and just say that the difference between the BC Greens and Green parties generally and other political parties is this core set of values. And one of the most interesting things for me is that when I've met Greens from around the world, I've met Greens from Australia and New Zealand, from Germany, from England, and across Canada. We all are very similar people. We're all sort of oriented to these fundamental values, to the idea that politics should be something that is improving people's lives, improving the world, definitely improving our environmental world, but that we operate differently from other parties because the Greens, I mean, are not oriented to how do we get power and how do we hold power. It's really how do we make democracy, how do we make government work better? And when you're rooted, I find, in these fundamental values, these ideas, these principles, it makes it really clear how to approach the role of being a Green. So participatory democracy, I'm going to give concrete examples. Yes, it means that the members of the party are participating in coming up with our policies and guiding us. But as an elected MLA, for me, participatory democracy meant that when there was a significant issue in my riding, in my constituency, um, I invited the community in. We worked together as a community to solve it.
Now, the riding that you is Cowichan Valley,
Mm-hmm.
and
Cowichan Valley.
that is on Vancouver Island.
Yeah, it's just
For
a
our,
little bit north of Victoria.
yeah, just for our guests from around the world that are watching us, and I like that actually because it gives them an idea not only about Canada but about BC in particular. So many people are interested in the political scene in BC, and as we approaching elections, interesting for them to listen to this.
Yeah, I'm running now in Victoria Beacon Hill in the capital city. I live here again. I've lived here for much of my adult life. Came here when I was 20. We moved up to the Cowichan Valley to Shawnigan Lake in 2011, thinking we were just going for 1 year. I'm a teacher. I was just going to teach at the school up there. And as you know, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And we ended up staying for 13 years. And what pulled me into politics really was the decision by the former BC Liberal government to put a contaminated landfill, 5 million tons of contaminated soil, to be dumped above our drinking watershed. So imagine a lake, Shawnigan Lake, a beautiful lake. The whole community relies on this lake for their drinking water. And the government thought that putting a landfill with contaminated soil just above that lake made sense. And of course, the community did not agree with that.
And they stopped doing that, right? So, but how did we ever get to the idea that that was the right thing to do to start with?
Well, this is what, it took us 4 years as a community to get the government to revoke that permit. But in the process, I looked at how that decision was made, John, and it was
Correct.
so shocking to me that you could have a government process that resulted in, oh yeah, it's okay to put contaminated soil uphill from drinking water. But what we have in BC is a system called, you'll be familiar with this, professional reliance.
Correct.
And in the early 2000s, the BC Liberal government basically moved all of the scientists and experts out of government. It was a big deregulation push. It had a real impact on forestry and forestry communities in this province.
Now one clarification, Sonia. If you
Yeah,
talk about BC Liberals, they renamed themselves
yeah,
BC United.
it did.
Now,
It's hard to keep track of
no.
BC politics, but it's so true. We
That's what
are,
makes it interesting.
and really the BC Liberals were kind of the remake of the BC Socred Party before that. But yes, BC Liberals
And
turned into
and
BC.
they are not in politics. We think that liberals are slightly left of center, and so but that the name was available. That's why they grabbed the name and they had
Yeah.
people in the MLI. So that's kind of how it happened. They say, "Oh my God, that's not good," you know. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and they described themselves as a big tent free enterprise party. They were slightly right of center. I would say now the BC Conservatives are the remaking of the right of center party.
correct,
So in BC historically, we've always had essentially a left of center and a right of center party with
correct.
different names.
Yeah.
And then the BC Greens. We're in the middle, and
Yeah,
we're very
let me
different.
name one more, Sonia, is just again for clarification.
Yeah.
So we now have an NDP government, left of center, but they've been in power for about 7 years, but they had a re-election. They had, with the Greens, they had a coalition government for a period of time.
Yeah, in 2017, it was a minority government outcome, which I know is pretty typical in European countries, but
Right.
pretty unusual here.
Yeah,
And so the three Greens, we made a confidence in supply agreement. It wasn't a coalition, but it was an agreement for us to support government. And
correct.
that lasted for over 3 years. It was a very stable, very productive government. People felt very good about government in those period. And I'm really proud of what we accomplished. And it comes back to that Shawnigan Lake story that, one of why I wanted to run for office and be an MLA was
Right.
really to reform this professional reliance system because it was leading to outcomes that were quite detrimental to BC. The Mount Polley disaster, the largest mining disaster in Canadian history,
In the interior.
in the interior where a tailings pond from Imperial Metals mine gave way, and all of that waste spilled into Quesnel Lake, which had been an incredibly pristine lake, habitat for a lot of species. And when the studies came out about Mount Polley and what happened, it was professional reliance. It was the government relying on the engineers, the qualified professionals who had been hired by industry to report back to government. And this is what this model was, and it still exists. But there's an inherent conflict of interest in this, that instead of government having its own experts to say, this is what's good for the environment, and this is what's good for public safety, when companies hire their own experts, of course, those experts are, working on behalf of the interests of the company. And
But that has changed, right? So there is now that those that are profession designated have an
yes,
obligation to
yes,
exercise
yeah,
care and responsibility, not
that's
just
right.
being kowtowed into I pay you and you make this happen type of thing, right?
And that change came about because when, in Shawnigan, what we found out was that it wasn't just that the company that wanted to run the landfill hired their own engineers. They had a secret 50-50 profit sharing deal with those engineers. I mean, it was incredible. And so when I got elected as MLA and we had that minority outcome, it was really important to me that in that agreement, and that agreement's still available, you can see it online, the confidence and supply agreement, reform of professional reliance was in there. And in 2018, the Professional Governance Act was introduced, and it includes, just as you say, John, these very clear expectations and stipulations that the qualified professionals must adhere to the ethical frameworks, to the regulation. And we have a superintendent of professional governance now that oversees this system so that it is, in fact, much more effective.
And that doesn't only apply to mining, like I do a lot of work in the forest industry. It also applies to registered professional foresters that are usually employed by companies that have that responsibility and the obligation to exercise rules, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so
Anyway,
important because we need the public to trust that this oversight is happening, that it's being done professionally, that people can trust decisions and can trust what's happening on the land.
right.
And for me, my entire journey into politics and being a politician is rooted in this fundamental belief I have that government should be trustworthy, that government should live up to the expectations of the public and people, and that in a ideal situation, people feel happy with their government. They feel like, yeah, I might not agree with everything they do, but I know that they're working on my behalf. I know that they're working in good faith. And the place we're at right now, I would say our politics isn't living up to people's expectations. People feel disappointed. People feel disenchanted, and we have sort of a combination of fear and anger driving our political discourse. And we, as the BC Greens, are really making an effort to say, actually, these problems are solvable. We can get to a place where we feel trusting and happy with government. We can solve the problems we're facing, and we're providing a guidebook for how to do that in our platform.
So a lot of people think of the Greens as being extreme in a certain direction. I like to think of them as being, correct me if I'm wrong, slightly left of center. They can work, and be effective as you have been in the last term, in particular relating to the landfill and other issues, that to have this balance is so critically important. I think we have right now, how many, 94 members?
93. Well, there's 87, but there'll be 93 after the election.
Yeah, and so we have two Greens being active, and makes them an official party because they have more than one. And so it becomes important looking forward to have that balance, I believe. So how many ridings have you got candidates and for this election, that is 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now?
Yeah, it's 36 days from now. So just over 5 weeks, or just about 5 weeks. So we have announced somewhere, I think about 55, 56 so far. We have about 86 that are in process, and we're just working on the last 7 ridings. So we're getting pretty close to having candidates in every riding.
Wow. So
Yeah.
and so, as you already indicated, public at large is not happy with the NDP government that we have right now because of health issues, cost of housing. So what are the main issues in today's election, in particular in the province of British Columbia?
Yeah. So the two that you just mentioned. So cost of housing, healthcare. People are really struggling with cost of living generally.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna insert into this, and I have lots of conversations with people. Climate change is it's in people's minds, and the point we're making in the work we do in our platform is climate change has to be seen as a serious issue because it's going to make everything more costly. When we look at 2021, the impacts of the heat dome, the atmospheric rivers, the fires, our economy took a hit somewhere between 10 and $17 billion just in BC alone. When you look at the cost of insurance because of climate events, the insurance industry is ringing the alarm bells about this. When you look at the impacts of drought, I have businesses in the Cowichan Valley who are struggling to just operate because they don't have access to enough water. When you look at farmers and food security, the cost of food impacted by climate change. And it's really alarming to me that we have a leader, who's the leader of the BC Conservatives, who says, well, sure, there's climate change. It's not really agreeing that it's caused by human activity. And he says it's not a serious issue for him. And I think that is folly in 2024. And we need leaders who follow the science, not make it up.
I agree with you, and I'm apolitical. I'm independent, and so I know John Rustad. He has indicated he wants to be on my podcast, but certainly one of the questions I will have for him, probably the first one, what do you think about global warming? Because the comments that I've heard so far coming from John, he can clarify it, but are troubling, because global warming is a big part of everybody's life. All you have to do is look around the world. And so it is not something that should be taken lightly. But
No.
I will ask him those questions, and that's why I'm asking you about it as well. And I believe having a balance is so important. It could well be, some people are now speculating that Conservatives have been very active. Is doing well in terms of the numbers so far, but it could well be that we have another minority possible party where again the Greens may come in as part of a minority government, and again that may be difficult. But add to that the other unhappy people from the ex-BC Liberal Party that are running as independent. It will be very, very interesting to see. But, on
that, John, I have a best case scenario that I want to pitch to British Columbians. The best case scenario that we can have in this election is that a handful of independents get elected in BC. So some of the MLAs who are running as independents, who were with the BC United before, Tom Shapitka, we have Dan Davies, Mike Bernier. There's I think there's another one coming. I don't want to jump out, but I think there's a fourth one coming. And then we have Adam Walker, who's running as an independent in Ladysmith.
Right.
In Ladysmith, Parksville. So we have a handful of independents. We have a handful of Greens. There's 6 ridings where we're very strong, 6 or 7 ridings. So West Van, Sea to Sky, Saanich, Victoria, Beacon Hill, Courtney Comox, Nelson Creston, Esquimalt, Colwood. We have really strong candidates, a really good chance of winning in these ridings. And then we get no party that gets all of the power. So we have a minority outcome. This would be the most representative legislature BC has ever had, in that we would have a diversity of voices, a diversity of representation, and we would be able to have the conditions where people have to set aside all the differences and all the politics and really focus on how are we solving problems? How are we getting things done? And I think that this is the best scenario that we could possibly have in BC. And when I describe this to people, I see the kind of happiness that they feel at the thought of, wow, we could have a legislature that is truly democratic, where when we have a majority government like we had in the last 4 years, the NDP could put forward any piece of legislation and ram it through. And if they didn't like the way the debate was going, they cut off the debate. They did this over and over and over again. They didn't even allow debate to happen in the legislature. That is not democracy. That's autocracy. That's an autocratic approach to governing. In a legislature where no party has all of the power, we get to a place where we are having the best debates, we are making the best decisions, and I would argue we will get the best outcomes for British Columbians. So if you're in a riding that can elect an independent, vote for that independent. If you're in a riding that can elect a Green, vote for a Green. Let all the other two parties duke it out in the rest of the ridings. We're talking about maybe a dozen ridings across BC that could shape this province and this election in the most positive way that we've seen in decades.
Now, the concern of, in particular, industry is one of the things that is happening right now. We, at one point, used to be looked at as an amazing province to invest in. Unfortunately, because of the lack of stability on the political side, and especially because of policies of the NDP in particular over the last 7 years, that we have drifted to the point, and I'm referring to also the forest industry, that used to be the economic driver of the province economy, and that has now, there used to be 120 sawmills in the province of British Columbia. There are now less than 60. And then I've been involved in the forest industry. I came from Holland in 1965 here, and came directly to Prince George with the hope of building a sawmill because there was a boom town. And then the other part, I know you came, your family, your dad and family came from East Germany, came here to Canada with very little, and believed in, I call it, every time I fly into Canada, in particular British Columbia, it's paradise. Mm-hmm. It's paradise. We are fortunate, although I've been in Prince George for 60 years. I work virtually 12 hours a day, 7 days a week if I can, when I'm in Prince George. So my wife said, no, we have to take some time separate so that the weekends, you will like this. I spend in North Saanich, where we have a place, and I fly into North Saanich on the island, and that's for our guests around the world watching us. That's close to Victoria, and I will go there tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. We fly in there, and I stay there for Saturday, Sunday, and then fly back here on Monday. But every time I do, it's just paradise. It could not possibly be any better. So we're so lucky. At the same time, though, we losing capital investment in the investors. That what is critical for British Columbia, in my opinion, we have to stimulate an entrepreneurship that have ideas that incent capital to come to British Columbia in terms of investing, creating jobs, and subsequently pay taxes and all the other things to support all the infrastructure that we have. And right now, the confidence of investors has been severely diminished or damaged. I still think a lot of people believe in British Columbia. I do. But a lot of people have exited or plan to exit. I'm not one of them. We employ 400 people. I'm the largest secondary manufacturer in the lumber industry. And in fact, I want to grow here. But now with the Greens in particular, I like to, and a lot of people look at the Greens that they are too far to the left and they are not supportive of industry. What are your views on that?
Oh, I'm so glad to be having this conversation because I think about this a lot. So number one, right now in the 2024 budget that just got released this spring, if you go to the revenue section of that budget and you look at the percentage of revenues that comes from oil and gas, mining, and logging combined, the percentage of revenues to the provincial government is 3.86% of total revenues. So we have to understand that the story of what is driving BC's economy has to catch up with the reality. When you talk about being secondary manufacturer, that's more of what we need. We should not be relying on being a primary economy. We should move way past the point where we are exporting raw resources, raw logs, raw minerals. And we should be aiming to be not just a secondary economy where we're manufacturing goods, but a tertiary economy where we are producing innovation. We're producing technologies. We are a knowledge-based and ideas-based economy. We know the economies that are really thriving in the world right now are the ones that are investing in education, investing in people, investing in knowledge, investing in technology, and creating the conditions where innovation and entrepreneurship are rewarded. And I have one really great example of this. Chase Barber, Edison Motors. You've probably heard of Chase.
Yep.
Chase has built an electric logging truck. He has built he has built trucks that are using a tiny fraction of diesel fuel because he's built an engine that regenerates as it drives. I've sat in this truck. It's enormous. I can't even see over the steering wheel. But Chase is the example of the kind of economic activity we want to be seeing, where he's innovating, where he's solving problems, where he's improving our environmental conditions, but also demonstrating, look what's possible when we apply innovation to the challenges we have. Now, Chase is not getting the support from the provincial government that he should be getting. And they have run into all sorts of obstacles trying to get grants and funding for setting up a manufacturing plant right here in BC that would not only be building these giant trucks, but be able to retrofit people's pickup trucks. So if you have a Ford F-150 and you want to move an electric motor in there and save yourself enormous amounts of money in diesel or gasoline, Edison Motors has the technology and the capacity to retrofit your truck with a new electric motor for a fraction of the price of what it would cost to buy a new electric truck. This is the kind of innovation that we should be celebrating and supporting in BC, a BC-based company right here that employs people. And yet we don't see a government that is excited by these kinds of prospects, and it's not leaning into that kind of economy. So I think we have to be able to, one, tell an updated story about BC. It is the best place to live, and it could be so much better. And two, what is the role government plays in this? One, it's investing in people. It's making sure we have an education system, a healthcare system, a transportation system, a social safety net that is parallel to the wonderful place that BC is. And two, it is not investing in the story of the past, subsidizing the methane gas industry to the tune of $5.4 billion, but instead investing in the economy we want to build, clean energy across the province. We could have regional hubs of clean energy production and innovation. And then we can be exporting the capacity to create and store and transmit clean energy. We should have in Northwest BC the Institute for Geothermal Energy that is really not just tapping into the geothermal potential, but tapping into the capacity that we could have as BC to be the technological leaders in this field. So this is what I'm excited about when we talk about the economy that we could have in this province. You are tapping into what needs to happen from our resources. It's not a matter of shipping those resources out along with the profits to multinational companies that don't care about the communities and the people here in BC. This is about a bottom line and dividends to shareholders. We have to reorient how we look at our resources. They have to benefit the people of BC. They have to benefit the future of our province. And the countries that do this have demonstrated that the wealth that can be generated from resources is a wealth that should be shared and should be invested into the people of the place where that wealth comes from. This wealth belongs to all of us. And yet the benefits have mostly flowed to shareholders of multinational companies.
And that not necessarily invest again in British Columbia and take it elsewhere. So,
No.
we have the best location from a
Yes.
market perspective for all natural resources that we have, potentially to add more social and economic value. We are the best location to the United States market, biggest market in the world, in close proximity to Asia or to Europe on the other side. We have the best infrastructure in terms of roads, air, rail to make that happen, but we must do another part. And at one point, I'm proud to say I've been very involved in Northern British Columbia, in the University of Northern British Columbia. Very proud of have been one part of making that part happen. Independent university, the College of New Caledonia, that is not only in Prince George but in the region, is supportive. Same with the university. I'm proud of the fact that I was able to put up the Trades and Technology Center that has my name on it. Actually, I'm very honored by that. But what I've been working on very hard is I say that probably 75-80% of the GDP in this province is produced north of Hope, in 2/3 of the province. And I believe that we should be investing in infrastructure. The biggest challenge that we have is access to a skilled workforce. And too often, with all due respect, I did a presentation, several presentations that I do at BCIT. I went down there 6 months ago or so. And it's giant. It is big, 40,000 students. And standing in the middle, I couldn't find the building. I had to, so
Right.
I've been working on a center of excellence in Northern British Columbia. And the center of excellence meaning not like BCIT, but a center that creates, attracts, and produces skill sets that we need to grow and stimulate the economy. And that some of the investment recently, another investment was made at BCIT for $270 million. I think that's all good, but I think the time has come to invest in the other regions, especially in Northern British Columbia, where all the resources are and where we have to add more social and economic value to the resources that we have, for the same reason that you say. Rather than putting it in a boxcar and a container and shipping it elsewhere, is troubling to me. Recently, with all the sawmills being sold here or shut down, we have the people from around the world looking at, including the Chinese, looking at buying up timber here, and I believe that's not the direction to go. We should invest here with people that are committed to British Columbia, and in particular Northern British Columbia and the regions.
We really we have to dream bigger, and this the boom and bust economy that has really driven BC for 150, 160 years now. It harms us in the boom, it harms us in the bust. And right now, you see another another round of mill closures, another round of the company moving out of town because it's not going to get the returns it wants, and it leaves behind all this devastation. I'm so aligned with you, John. The investment has to be in to the possibility and potential that we have here to be an economic powerhouse. But it's not by opening the doors to every multinational company that says, can we come and extract your resources and then leave town afterwards? It's by opening the doors to the possibility of us actually being leaders in all sorts of fields, but especially in clean energy, in additional value-added manufacturing of our resources, in ensuring that we are adding that dividend that comes with really investing in the people and the innovation that has to go along with this.
So
it feels like we're leaving so much on the table in this province. Like we're just letting it lie there, and we're not picking up what's possible.
For 50 years, I built a value-added manufacturing plant, employs well over 400 people in different, in Prince George, Vanderhoof, Houston, wanting to expand even now. We made, in fact, a proposal to one of the major companies here to purchase their mills and their tenure that they intend to shut down, and they are exiting the province. In fact, the name of the company is Canfor, and we just did that recently. Just today, I produced a podcast that is now was released just the afternoon, telling the story behind it in terms of why should we do that, what has been the difficulty in the forest industry. I urge your listeners, and even from around the world, to listen to that. Yeah. We want to invest in it, and that will have cost us 5,000 jobs. Our company, the Brink group of companies, will purchase those assets and create 5,000 jobs that have disappeared. And I believe that's where the future is, investing by the people in this region. And my question to you is, and by a lot of other people, do you support that type of investment and entrepreneurship activity, and saying we have to expand, attract capital that will invest in further manufacturing, in particular, creating those jobs in the communities?
Yeah, absolutely, John. And that's what we should be striving for. Not continuing down this path of just exporting raw resources. We need to invest in exactly what you're doing, right? In companies and people that are invested in the communities where they're creating industry, creating jobs. And it's not a short-term, how do we extract as much profit as we can in the shortest amount of time? It's a long-term vision for a truly sustainable economy built on the investment in people, in technology, in industry, and resources. I want to come back to John Rustad for a moment, because his vision, and I look forward to hearing your interview with him, but his vision really is, we'd invite the forestry companies back in to do as they've done in the past. We'd invite the LNG industry to come in and massively expand, and combine that with him saying that he doesn't take climate change seriously. The biggest problem I have with this is that what he's essentially saying to the people of BC is, we're not going to take seriously the need to mitigate climate impacts, to mitigate the impacts from climate events that we're having. We're not going to invest in adaptation to make sure that communities are prepared and resourced and able to withstand these climate events that we see over and over again. We're not going to invest in emergency prevention and preparedness. And when these impacts hit, we're not going to have planned for how we're going to protect people and communities. That's a really important thing for him to respond to, is if you're telling us you don't take climate change seriously and the impacts it has on people, communities, and the economy, then how can we expect you to govern seriously in a time when I don't care if you don't believe in the science. You just have to look at the data. The ocean is the warmest it's ever been. The last 15 months are the warmest they've ever been. The global temperature is the highest it's ever been. And we are having storms and weather events unlike anything we've ever seen. The hailstorm in Calgary last month was the most expensive event for the insurance industry in Calgary in history. Yeah. So we can pretend all we want that the science isn't real. It doesn't care. The impacts are coming, and what we need are governments that take this seriously and that look for not just the responsibility that governments have in a moment like this, but the necessity and opportunity to reshape our communities and our economy in a way that makes us resilient and strong and safe and secure. We cannot have those things. We cannot have security and resilience if we are pretending that the world is not the way the world is today.
Yeah, and we can see it in California, southern United States, and all over the place. Europe in particular, so that global warming is a reality, and we have to be attending to it as best we can and be aware of it. Now, the other part in terms of resource development, obviously COFI, the Council of Forest Industry, has been very proactive, but I used to be a member for about 40 years of them, the longest serving director of COFI. I was the vice chair of COFI, but I disagreed with them strategically, so I resigned from that group last April. But I believe looking at the resource and then again talking about the NDP, I had a great deal of respect for John Oregon, the premier of the NDP party during his term. Unfortunately, health issues forced him to resign. But the intentions paper that I believe it was in June of 2019 or 2021 when he announced that, I spoke to it, is that we have to, his points were to get more involvement of First Nations. I'm supportive of that.
Yeah.
To be more aware of old growth and protecting old growth, but it went in some cases too far, in particular, and old growth as I see it, and even as one that works in the forest industry, the large major trees that in particular on the coast, should be preserved. I think we have 11 million hectares of old growth. I believe it went too far, where it paralyzed to a certain extent the interior, where trees that were this big, that happened to be 150 years, could not be harvested. It went too far. And then the other part about it was that to stimulate further manufacturing and value-added manufacturing, obviously I'm supportive of that.
Yeah.
And the people that spoke to the intentions paper was somebody from Labour, somebody from First Nations, and then I spoke to it as somebody from the forest industry, particularly from the perspective of being a value-added manufacturer, and saying that the forest industry will look different. In my views, the mills will become smaller, more in the communities. There'll be more technology involved, which will reduce the labor component. On the other hand, I call that innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary that will produce many more jobs per cubic meter. And the two combined will be able to become competitive globally, where we take 100% of the lumber manufactured, the 50% of that will go up the value chain, the top 25% and the bottom 25%. And I believe that's the direction we have to go. And that's why I made the offer to Canfor to purchase the assets that they just shut down now, as well as the assets of Polar or the Bear Lake and the one in Houston, of creating a new company that will change the industry in British Columbia.
And that's what's needed. And the idea of just continuing to do the same thing and expecting different outcomes is wrong, right? We know that that's not the case. I've visited Kolesnikov lumber in the Kootenays, and they're doing some extraordinary things with mass timber and value-added manufacturing, using every bit of the wood that they harvest out of the forest. And then the other thing, John, I think is we have to look at our harvesting practices. We have to look at how do we reimagine how we're operating on the landscape. Clear-cut logging with one feller buncher doesn't produce jobs, and it doesn't produce forests that are going to be able to sustain the manufacturing industry that you want to build. I look at Freya logging and the fact that they are approaching logging without clear cutting. They're doing thinning, they're doing restoration. We have a job to do to bring our forests back to a place where they can sustain a long-term industry, a long-term economy for communities, and be able to also withstand the impacts that we're seeing from climate change. We have to take the values that we want from forests and recognize we can't just look at one value. It can't just be timber and the money we're extracting. We have to look at biodiversity, at drought resistance, at capacity to withstand climate, at recreation, at habitat, and at economy and timber. And when we start putting all those values together, and we start approaching our land use and forestry practices through that lens, we create a future that is more predictable. It's more certain. Now, it doesn't give the quick profit grabs that have driven industry in this province for so long, but it gives the long-term, sustainable, and certain economy that we all should be striving for.
And the key there, Sonia, from a corporate perspective, is that the system in BC, the political system, is that every 4 years approximately we have an election. It's usually left or right. Then we appoint a minister of forest that in most cases, respectfully, doesn't understand it. And
No.
so by the time they have figured out where to hang their jacket, respectfully, and where the washroom is, every 2 years we change them again. And that does not work. It is okay politically, but we have underlying a longer term policy that gives comfort to investors that put hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, into infrastructure, that they have longer term, predictable views of having fiber available to their operations. And that includes sustainable forestry. We have to treat it like a farm. The way we are doing it now, volume-based tenures are not effective. It should be area-based so that we create accountability and create an incentive to invest in that land base. And the good example, and I have worked in Europe. I spent 70 years of my life in the forest industry, 10 years of it in Holland and in Sweden, is we have the same land base that we use for forestry as Sweden does, and they produce probably 50% more per hectare than we do, and we can do the same. But there are underlying fundamental problems with it that we have to change to make it the next 20, 30 years are predictable. And I think that's where we have to go to create that confidence to the investor to invest in the future of British Columbia. But we have it all.
Yeah, we have it all. John, I don't think your listeners would have thought that you and I would so vehemently agree with each other, but we do. I mean, because we are looking at this from the same perspective. How do we create certainty? How do we create predictability? How do we create long-term healthy communities? How do we ensure that we're making decisions that aren't a 4-year time frame, but are a 40 and a 400-year time frame? This is the difference between the Greens and other political parties. This is because the Greens have always existed in this time frame that is outside of the standard political time frame. We're not looking at 4 years. We're not looking at 10 years. We're looking at 50 and 100 years. And
the green philosophy is very much part of the European, the political scene. So the reason for this interview for our people that are watching us from around the world, but in particular in British Columbia, because the election is the 19th. I want to have this discussion. I did with Kevin Falcon. Unfortunately, 2 days after I did, he resigned. I was not to blame. No, I'm just joking. I've known him for a long time.
I'm not going anywhere, John. I'm not going anywhere, just so you know.
So, but I wanted to make sure that I do the same, with all due respect, with all political parties in BC. I do that with the Greens, and respectfully, Sonia, thank you for being on my show and talking about these delicate topics, because I believe it gives people more of a feeling as they listen to you to understand the Greens and who they are. And then I hope that John Lestad has indicated he wants to be on my show. I hope he does it soon. And then at the same time, Premier Ibby and the Minister of Forest, Bruce Ralston, although I've contacted him numerous times over since last Friday to give him a heads up on a major project that I'm proposing is in the work that will create 5,000 jobs, change the forest industry in British Columbia. The podcast was released yesterday on the Brink, and unfortunately he has been too busy likely to return my phone calls, which is fine. And Premier Ibby, I'm not sure why he avoids Northern BC or but for whatever the reason is, but I still hope he will come on my podcast.
Yeah, John, I we'll go back to participatory democracy. Part of that is for elected people and people who are asking to be elected to be as open and transparent and available as possible. And I would say that, my direction to my team is we say yes. If somebody wants to talk with us, if somebody wants to interview me, the answer is yes, because it's really important that people have the opportunity to hear from me directly, to understand who I am, and to understand the positions and the solutions that we are offering. I have one quick story to end the podcast with,
Yeah.
if you'll
Yeah, go
humor
ahead.
me. When my son was in, I think about grade 7 or 8, he had an assignment, and it was a map of British Columbia, and he had to indicate all the places he'd been to on that map. And because of the way that I've approached my role as a elected official, every summer we've headed out on the road and we've done road trips around BC. I've been to Prince George many times. I've been to most places, and he was able to indicate that he'd been to all but 2 of the towns listed on the map of BC. We have crisscrossed this province, and it's been really important to me to not just, try to understand a place theoretically. You understand a place by being there, by going there. I actually had dinner with Nathan Cullen in Prince George in 2017, soon after I got elected, to have conversations about how do we be the best representatives. And for me, the way that you do that is you get to know people, you get to know communities, you get to know what people's dreams and hopes are. And amazingly, those dreams and hopes are pretty similar. People want to have a healthy family, a strong community, a sense of purpose, good work. All of these things are possible in this province. We need the leadership and the vision and the hope and the capacity to deliver from government to make all those dreams come true.
And as you, Sonia, I'm not exiting BC. I'm here to stay and invest. So the
We're
other
both
part that I was going to say is your episode 311 on
Yes.
the Brink, 310 that's already released. Yours will be released this afternoon.
Okay.
So we'll have it in there quickly. 310 is about my proposal to change the forest industry and to acquire the mills that have been shut down, create 5,000 jobs. I suggest if you have an opportunity to watch it, and it will give you a better perspective of what I'm trying to do and the problems that exist in the industry and going forward. I wish you luck. I again remind everybody the election is October the 19th. We need everybody to be active, in particular in all elections, but in particular this one, because the province is going to change direction. We don't know what it will look like, but it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Sonia.
Thank you,
Thank you very much
John.
for being my guest.
Thank you. What a pleasure. And I really enjoyed the conversation. And I can't wait to get back up to Prince George and come see you in person and hopefully get a tour of these mills that you've got up and running as secondary manufacturing plants.
I will do that, Sonia. Good luck.
Okay.
Stay in touch.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care.